Hello everyone, welcome to episode 2 of our dbt Bootcamp. In our previous video, we discussed everything about dbt and why dbt is so important for any data practitioners. Now, in this video, what we are going to be focusing is moving away from that basic background understandings to actually setting up dbt on our system. So once we've set it up dbt on our machines, the next one would be to actually building the dbt models together. So really exciting stuff ahead. So let's start by setting up dbt on our machine. So in order for us to set up dbt, there are a few dependencies. So we can't just set it up dbt and expect that to run, because there are a bunch of dependencies that we need to set it up prior to getting dbt up and running. So let's start by setting up dbt on our machine. There are a bunch of dependencies that we need to, first of all, go through, set it up, and get the foundation ready before we can go and build dbt models. So let me share my screen and show you what are some of those dependencies. So it's much more easier to understand those first. Okay, here on the screen, you can see some of the tools that we'll be using as part of our dbt Bootcamp. So when I said earlier, we'll be setting up dbt. These are all the things that we need to have prior to getting the dbt up and running. So the screen on the screen here, you can see the icons. dbt-core is what we are going to be using, and especially dbt-core. So we are not going to touch dbt cloud as part of this video. We'll have the dbt cloud in upcoming videos possibly, but for now it's purely open source version of dbt, which is what we'll be setting up. We'll of course need our VS Code and IDE. This is where we'll be writing our dbt models. We'll be interacting with our terminal. So the terminal icon you see here, we'll be accessing it via VS Code. The terminal itself will need that before we use the VS Code to install some dependencies. Then we'll need the GitHub, and GitHub is where we'll be storing all of our code, which we'll be producing locally, and then we'll be storing that in our remote GitHub projects. And then we have Google BigQuery. This is the data warehouse of the choice for our dbt Bootcamp. So we'll be connecting and building our models inside our BigQuery data warehouse. And the most important of all, like this particular video, the setup is focused for the Mac machine users. So some of these are still very much relevant, but it's not exactly going to be the same for the Windows users. For Windows users, the process is slightly different, because you'll need to kind of set up something called WSL2 and then perform the similar steps that you'll see here. So it's not like hugely different if you're using WSL2 on Windows, but it's a bit more seamless and straightforward for Mac users. So let's start with that. So what we are going to be needing for our next step is to set up everything. So the easiest one right now is for you to go and download the VS Code. So Visual Studio Code, you can just go to Google, type in Visual Studio Code, download the correct version. If you just download from macOS, it will do it for you automatically, and then just install it. So once you have installed the VS Code, just make sure you can actually open the VS Code, so we can confirm that everything is kind of up and running. So that's really is the easiest one, and the rest of the few things that you'll see in the next step would be slightly more involved if you're very new to the kind of the world of dbt and data modeling, etc. And especially if you're coming from more of a products to the open source world of kind of data modeling and transformation. So the next one we need to do is set up the GitHub account and then the project itself. So again, the step here is quite straightforward. All you need to do is Google GitHub. If you don't have GitHub account at all, you'll need to set it up everything from scratch. And the process is quite straightforward. You just put in your email address, etc. I'm not going to walk you through all of that because it's, just to save some time. Once you've created your GitHub account, you'll, if you're a new user, you'll have an empty kind of an area. If you're an existing user of the GitHub, that's quite straightforward for you. I'm assuming you know how to work around GitHub. So you'll first of all be landed to an overview page. We don't need to worry too much about it. What we need to do is to go to repositories and come to the click on the new repositories, and let's create a new repository. I'm going to call this repository dbt Bootcamp, and I'm going to keep this public. And I want to keep this public because it's much more easier, and since I'm creating these videos, you can all kind of come here and access the dbt Bootcamp repository and see and get the latest work that we would be doing. So you don't have to do it from scratch if you prefer, but I'll recommend you to follow everything through throughout this video, so you learn through the doing, not just watching videos. And really, this is as simple as that. And once we've kind of given its name, all we need to do is create repository. I just want to very quickly highlight the difference between public and private. So if you set this as a private, no one else is going to have an access to that, obviously. However, the process of you needing to kind of authenticate with your local dbt project to GitHub would be different. So you will need to create something called like a security key. You will need to put the security key inside the GitHub repository settings area, and then you would kind of be able to authenticate and push your changes to GitHub. For now, to reduce the complexity, I'm just going to keep it as public. I'll create repository. It's as simple as that. We now have a clean dbt Bootcamp repository. So you can see here, there's nothing. And once we kind of get to the next step of creating the dbt code, we'll push it and you'll see all the changes coming here. So the third one we need to set up is the Google Cloud project. So with the Google Cloud project, we would be able to use BigQuery data warehouse, which will kind of authenticate with our local workspace and then push and materialize our dbt models within our data warehouse. So currently I already have my project set up to dbt Masterclass, which is what my kind of dbt Masterclass project is based off. I don't want to do that. I want to create a purely new project. So again, the process here is very similar, right? So if you're creating this for the very first time, you would need obviously a Google Gmail account or an account that you can use your Google Cloud console. And to access this console area, you can simply just type in Google Cloud Console, and it will get the link, or you can just manually type in console.cloud.google.com, and it will take you to this welcome page. Now, once you are here in the welcome page, there would be some dependencies if you're creating this for the very first time. And you don't need to worry too much about this because I'm creating this not for the very first time. I'm creating this because I've already set up everything that I need to do. So I can simply just go ahead and create the project itself. When you do that, you will need to set up the billing, which is, again, is simple, nothing complicated here. All you need to do is follow through the process, and it's as simple as that. And also make sure, like, I think Google is still giving some kind of free credit for the new project. So if you can claim that, sure, that's great. You get some free credit to use. But for now, we are going to focus on creating a new project. So I'm going to, again, call this dbt Bootcamp. And I'll leave the organization as no organization. That's not a problem. And you'll see here on the top right corner is saying it's creating project name dbt Bootcamp. Awesome, the project creation is completed. Let's select this project, and straight away you can see the dbt Bootcamp is connected to this. Now, during this process, you might be kind of asked to put in the billing details. So just follow through that, and I'm pretty certain there ain't gonna be any issues with this, and you would be able to successfully create this. It's really simple as this, guys. And now we have done 3 kind of prerequisites, which is downloading and installing Visual Studio Code, getting our GitHub account sorted, and then the third one is our the setting up of the BigQuery data warehouse within our Google Cloud project. So here, all we need to do now is really click on BigQuery and it will take you to the BigQuery interface. It's really as simple as that. Now, we've done and completed our prerequisites. Now the next one for us to do is to set up the dbt core in our local machine. In order for us to do that, we need to do a couple of things. First of all, let me take you through the documentation. It's always is the most important place any developer, I would say, should go and read and understand this. Even though you might be watching me kind of doing this together, I think it's really important for us to not just blindly follow something and then, get it working, sure, but what's going to happen if it actually breaks? You don't know how, and you wouldn't know how to go and fix this. So it's really important, I would say, is to understand the documentation and how to do things. Not just installation, like really debugging your projects and everything around that. Documentation is like the golden place that we should go and get references from. So as you can see here, we have the dbt core and installation page on the screen. And it says a few things about what dbt core is, etc., which I'm sure you all remember from our previous video. dbt core is an open source project, and if you remember, you have to kind of set everything up from the scratch, which is what we're doing. Now, this is the important area that I want to highlight. There are a couple of different ways to install dbt core. And as the documentation suggests, it recommends you to use pip to install dbt. There are a couple of other things like Docker image to install dbt, installing dbt from sources. They are good and they have like slightly different use cases and some for specific like advanced use cases, which I won't touch as part of this video. This first one here is a pretty standard, and I would say like I have been using dbt to build really complicated data warehouse projects and onboard many of the kind of technical users who would go and build dbt models, and this works. It just works. So you don't have to worry too much about this. The only thing here you have to keep in mind is, are you a Mac user or are you a Windows user? Depending on that, the process might be slightly different, but for Mac users, if you follow this video, I'm pretty certain you would be able to get this up and running. So let's have a look at this. I've got the pages open just so that we are it's quicker to transition between the pages. Yeah, we have the install with pip option here. Now what this says is we need a Python virtual environment. Python is a programming language if you're coming here for the very first time, and the virtual environment is super critical. So I want to take a pause here and very quickly explain to people who don't know what virtual environment is and why you would want to use a virtual environment. So typically, if you're just building, let's say Python code, Python script, or any application that involves Python. So we are on the Python sort of topic. So if you think about the process of building something, you would go and write code on your local machine. Now, simply just writing Python code is sure. You can write a function that calculates some things, or a function to interact with something. But then for the most of the specific, like the use case, it would require you to install some dependencies and libraries, etc. So people who are familiar with, I guess, data science and AI, pandas as a library is super popular, or a library to work with PDF files, right? So you would basically go and install those libraries on your machine and go start writing Python code. You can imagine what's going to happen now, right? So you have this Python code, let's just say, which does reads a PDF file and extract text from the PDF file. And you write the Python code and it works fine. But then let's say in 2 to 3 months time, that library has a new update. During that time, you've also created like 5 different, I guess, different Python code to do certain operations. which is again depending on this one library, right? So this library is changed and it's updated, and now you go and make an update to this one library. You'll do like pip upgrade PDF blah library. Now there's a high chance that some of these dependencies would be broken because maybe this update has some backward incompatibility issues, things like that. So now you are basically intentionally have broken, well, unintentionally, I guess, have broken the Python code that you were not intending to break, right? So the virtual environment really helps solve one of these issues. So having a virtual environment really helps you build your code in this kind of like encapsulated manner. So whatever you do, whatever you're running, whatever dependencies and libraries that you're kind of building for this particular project stays isolated within the virtual environment. So it's super critical because now within that virtual environment, you can have this code up and running. Whenever there are dependencies, you're not impacting other projects that could be or might be using the same libraries because everything is like isolated in their own kind of virtual environments. So hence, having a virtual environment is super important because as a project grows and becomes more and more complicated, you want to make sure nothing breaks and smallest changes won't have like a major impact and headache later down the line. So slight tangent, but I think it's super important to understand why we are doing certain steps and why the documentation here is suggesting that we should use virtual environment. Now, on the topic, this topic of virtual environment in Python, obviously we need a Python as well, right, to create a virtual environment. So if we are just starting out and fresh, our machine has nothing, we need to install Python as well. So here, if we scroll down, it basically explains you how to kind of set up everything, prerequisite, make sure you have Python installed. Once you've installed Python, this is how you can check. And pip basically helps you install these packages. And yeah, so this basically here at the bottom, you can see different commands that you can run and then how you can activate the virtual environment and you can deactivate the virtual environment. And the rest of the stuff here, we can come back to that later, or I will just show you through the video. But this is the core concept. So before we kind of go and do the next step, it's super important for us to understand why and what steps we would be performing next. So in order for us to install Python, there are a variety of ways to install Python, which I won't be able to cover in this video because we would be going in a very different direction. What I will tell you, I'll share with you today is some of the ways that I like to install Python, and especially on a Mac machine. So Mac machine has something called Brew. So we can look at the Brew here. Actually, the previous page was quite nice. So you can see what is a Homebrew. Homebrew basically allow you to kind of manage the packages within your macOS system. And now again, I will take a slight tangent to help you to understand what it does. So staying with the Python topic, Python also have many versions. For people who can remember, Python had, I believe, version 2.7 or something like that, which was there for like longest period of time. A lot of things were built using Python 2.7, and then we kind of moved away from Python 2.7 to Python 3. And during that point, lots of libraries had an impact. They had to make changes, etc. And if you're basically installing these Python kind of the versions in your machine, it is really, really complicated to switch between different versions and also making sure things are not broken and kept in an isolated manner. You could also have like variety of other sort of packages that you would be installing in your macOS. Now, Homebrew allow you to kind of manage those packages in a very kind of nice and easy way. You can install, you can uninstall these packages without having to kind of, go through such painful experience of managing dependencies and all those kind of things. Upgrading libraries is also super quick. So To simplify this, think of this as like a manager for your kind of software packages that you have installed in your Mac. So we will use this to manage our Python version. So using Homebrew, we'll install Python, and it will make things super easy for us going forward. So if there is a new Python version that we want to move to, so Python version 3.10, 3.11, 3.12 is super quick. All we need to do is like brew install Python version, something like that, and that works. So we need to install Python, and we don't need to kind of go and read, well, you need to go and read all of this to understand why we would be doing this, but I have the code ready, which I'll share with you, so it's super quick and easy, at least for our bootcamp, so we don't have to spend too much time sort of spending on the documentation. So what I'm going to do is search terminal. I've got two things here, right? So I've got iTerm and terminal. So if you haven't installed iTerm by yourself, don't worry about it. I'm just going to use terminal so we can kind of keep things consistent. Now here, I have the code ready. So I will be copy pasting here. So let me just make it slightly bigger so we can all see. So here now I'm pasting the command. What this will do is it will download the brew. So we can actually then use that to install our bash behind the scene. So once you've kind of copy pasted and press enter, what this will do is it will get the install shell script and it will get everything sort of install it for you. So you don't need to do anything kind of complicated here really. And for most users, the thing might be slightly different here to what you're seeing here on the screen. It's asking me for sudo access. And that's because I have multiple different users in my Mac. So I can kind of separate my my kind of accounts into different kind of teachings. As you know, I have my dbt Masterclass where I teach Masterclass kind of courses, etc. So this is specifically for dbt Bootcamp. So hence it's asking me for sudo access. But for most users, I do believe you won't have to kind of go through this because you're most likely just going to have one kind of user. So all I need to do here is just put in my password, and that's it. It will ask me to confirm where the script is going to be installed. And I'm happy with all of this, so I'm just simply going to press enter, and you will see straight away it's downloading and installing Homebrew. So let's give it a few seconds and see where we go with this. Nice, it's saying installation successful. That is great. Just one thing to note here is some of the information that you see here on the screen might be slightly different to you. Don't worry too much about it because depending on the version updates, depending on some maybe macOS versions, etc., things might be slightly different for you. Don't worry about it. The most important thing is for you to be kind of checking here if the installation is successful. Once the process is completed, we can double check if everything has been installed successfully. We can do that by basically just simply typing in brew and enter. And it will give you some information here how you can use example usages for brew, etc., etc. What we are interested in is, of course, to make sure the command is working. And typically, we would also type in brew -- version to double check the Homebrew version. So with that, we have successfully installed and confirmed that brew is working and we have the right version. So let's move on to the next step, which is where we would be now going and installing Python. Because if you remember, if we go back to our dbt-core package here, we need pip to install dbt. Now pip is part of Python. So before we can use pip, we need to install Python into our machine. So to install Python is really straightforward. Since we now have brew, all we need to do is type in the command brew install python 3, press enter, and that's as simple as that, guys. Hence I was explaining earlier that we need brew to set it up because then everything else becomes super simple after that. So you can see here brew is installing Python 3 and you can see what it's doing behind the scene. It's installing certain packages, etc. So you can see here, like most of the things here is completed. It's all good to go. It's complaining some stuff here about the permissioning. Don't worry too much about it. This is, you might or might not see this. It's mostly because I have multiple accounts. So that's all good to go. So Brew has installed Python 3. We need to again double check if the Python is installed properly. So we can double check if Python is installed correctly by typing similar command as what we did before. If you look at this here, we typed in here somewhere brew, here brew, and then brew -- version, homebrew version. You can see we're going to be doing the same thing here, guys. So Python 3 -- version, and then you can see the Python 3.11 is installed. That is awesome. So now we have installed Python. The next step is this. So we can now follow through this step here. So we have already installed Python. So if I go back to my documentation of dbt, before we can do this and making sure we have created the virtual environment, we have installed Python so far. If you look at the prerequisite, it's saying Python install your machine. We have just done this. And the next step is have pip installed. And that's what we are going to be doing next. So let's go back to our terminal. And into our terminal, we would be installing our pip. Let me just copy paste the command again to install pip. You can see this command is very similar to how we installed our Homebrew or Brew. Curl and then the link to get the pip. And that's all we need to do. You paste it, press enter, and wait for a few seconds, and that should be it. Nice. So we got the pip, but we need to kind of install the pip using this command. So we'll do Python 3 and then run the get pip.py to install pip. Nice one. You can see here it found the previous version because I tested to make sure everything is working nicely. So what it did was it found the existing installation, but it also kind of make sure that there is no kind of clashes with the existing version. So that's all good to go. We'll double check if the pip version is correctly installed. So we'll start with doing the same thing, pip -- version. I think it's actually pip 3 is what we installed. There you go. Nice. So we have pip 3, and then you can see we get the correct versioning. That basically means we now have the brew installed and command is working correctly. We have used the brew to install Python, and that is working correctly, as you can see here in our terminal. We've used the Python to install pip, and you can see here it's all working nicely. It's all functional. So that's great. We've kind of came a long way from when we started with our foundation and where we are now. We are very much getting close to setting up dbt. So bear with me. We have a few more things to do, but we're getting there. So let's go back to our documentation, right? So here it is saying, sure, install pip and then go to set up Python virtual environment. But I want to take a pause here and let's rethink step by step. What we have done so far is we've set up Python and we got pip. Of course, we can go and create Python virtual environment and everything, but what will happen is when we actually try to connect dbt with our Google Cloud project, which we created earlier, it will fail because you have not authenticated. So this is the project, because we have not authenticated yet. There is nothing in process just yet. So what we need to do is we need to install Google SDK. So Google SDK, you need to download it, the correct version for your machine. We are using macOS, hence I've selected the macOS here. If you're a Windows user, sure, you can get the Windows version, etc., etc. We are Mac users, so we would be sticking to Mac. All you need to do is click on this and it will download this zip file. So let me show you what that will look like. If you just give me a minute. So here, once the download is completed, you'll get a file like this. All you need to do is double click and you would have the Google Cloud SDK here in your downloads. Once you have downloaded this, what we need to do is to go next step and install Google Cloud SDK. Now the way to install that is by going to the folder. Let me just copy paste the command, and basically what I'm doing is really just following these steps that you see here on the screen, but I've got the commands ready, so it's easier for me to just copy paste here. Let me clear the screen so we can see everything for this clearly. What we are doing here is we are in the downloads folder. So for people who don't know how to get to downloads, let me show you quickly. And ls command allow you to list the folder contents that you're currently in. So let me go back one directory, and you'll see if I do ls, it will list all the folders that I'm currently in the parent of. So these are all the child folders that is currently inside there, inside this. Now I want to change the directory to downloads because that's where we just downloaded our Google Cloud, the SDK. So once we are inside the correct folder, it doesn't have to be download. You can download it anywhere, put it anywhere. Just make sure you're at the right path. If you're not, this command will fail. So we are in the right place. Hence, when we press enter, you can see it's triggered this job. So you can, it's really up to you to choose what you want to choose here. I'm just going to say no to keep it a bit more simple. And it basically said what are the things that it will install already and what we have not installed yet. And you can see some of the things are already installed on my machine. And that's because, like I said previously, I had to do some testing just to make sure. But again, for you, if you follow the same thing, it should be the same. You shouldn't have any issue with installing this thing. What is important here is though, to answer yes here. So it will make sure that everything is kind of correctly defined within your path. Next, what we need to do is it's asking for us to make sure the path here is correct. So I'm using this specific kind of terminal configuration, which is called ZSHRC. You might not have this, so don't worry too much about it. All you need to do if you see this is to press enter. That's all good to go. If you remember previously, this is quite critical. We used brew to install Python. We do not want to again install Python, which is a different version, right? So here we want to say no to this. And that's it. It's as simple as that. Once you've set this up, it will go through all of these processes, install Google Cloud SDK. Now you have Google Cloud SDK installed in your machine. Now here you can see behind the scene our documentation. So installing is one thing, but we also need to initiate it and then authenticate it, because currently what has happened is so far we have Google Cloud SDK downloaded, installed in your machine. You have your Google Cloud project here. These are two separate things, right? We need a way, a mechanism to connect these two guys together. So when we make changes, when we need authentication, when we want to materialize or communicate with our data warehouse, the system knows how to kind of authenticate all of those things and send instructions to our Google Cloud project. So what we need to do next is to initiate, which is what you see here on the screen. And it's basically what I'm going to be copy pasting. And that's it. It will basically ask for certain information. Now I did this previously already. So the screen here looks slightly differently, but again, it's really straightforward. So you shouldn't have hopefully any issues while you're here. What I want to do is I'll just select this reinitialization. So I can take you through the same similar process, right? So it is now asking which account do I want to choose. I'll just choose my email, which is what I want to use. And then you can also see here, the next step is asking me is which cloud projects do I want to select? Now, I have multiple projects. Like I said previously, I have my other kind of the courses that I'm teaching, dbt Masterclass. I have Analytics Engineering Bootcamp on Udemy, etc. So there's so many things happening, hence you see so many projects. If you're literally just starting and if you've created your project just now, you're not going to have so many projects like you see here on the screen. So all you need to do is make sure you're selecting the right project ID that we are going to be associating our dbt Bootcamp with. If you remember, we created our project called dbt Bootcamp, and the way to find the right ID is by going to Google Cloud, and then you can see here, right? It says dbt Bootcamp and then the number associated with it. And that's all we need to double check that's the right project, and that's what you see here on the screen. The number is 3, so I'll select number 3, and that's it. What we have done is we have now configured our Google Cloud SDK, our local sort of the environment to associate with this project. Okay, so once we've completed this, the next thing we need to do is authenticate our systems together. So the command to do this would be gcloud auth application default login. Once you've done that, it will open up this page. You will click on the right account, you'll click continue, you allow Google Auth library to communicate, and it will say you're now successfully authenticated with gcloud. And you should also see all the things here, right? So that's great. Now what this means is we have successfully set up our Google Cloud, and this is all good to go. So to repeat what we have done so far, we have done installing so we have installed Brew. We've used Brew to install Python. We've used Python to install pip. We've downloaded the Google Cloud SDK. We have we've installed Google Cloud SDK, and then we have set up the correct project. And then we have authenticated Google Cloud with our local machine to the Google Cloud project. So that's awesome. Now, we still have a few more things to do before we can actually get to the dbt building and setting it up. You might be thinking at this point, oh, there's a lot of steps to do. Sure, but this is like a one-off thing, and this is important for you to also consider. So there's a lot of these steps here, hence dbt has also kind of created this dbt cloud where you don't have to do any of this really. They're simple. The process to set up dbt cloud is really straightforward. So that's like one of the advantages and kind of, I guess, the challenges that some people would find is setting up dbt core. But hey, dbt core is free to use and it's super powerful. And I would say this experience that you're kind of going through, setting it up everything from scratch, really understanding the steps that's needed to set this all up is super important. So these are whatever you're learning right now is really important skills to have as a data expert. So yeah, so let's continue next. So next, what do we need to do? And we need to install Git. So if we search Git, it basically explains here just on the screen, right? It gives you the version control. And so what we need to install next is Git. And you can see here on the screen, the Git is a distributed version control system that tracks version of the files. So GitHub, you can think of GitHub as like a managed version of your kind of Git system, because whatever you're running locally is the Git distributed version control system that you're running locally. But typically in a larger systems, you would want to version control and go through all those Git strategies, etc. locally, but at the same time, you want to push those changes, right? And that's what we've done before. And we created So that's what we've done before, right? We created our GitHub account and then specific GitHub repository on our GitHub remote server, which is again, it's a Git system that's running on GitHub. Now, so what you want to do is install Git on your local machine as well, correct? Because you want to basically use the same kind of the distributed version control system on your machine to source control your code, version control your code, and create new branches and features and etc. And that's how you basically build powerful systems and solution in a larger or even like any well-managed data systems. So being able to work with Git, being able to understand Git strategies, etc., is super important. I'm not going to be able to kind of take you through everything in detail. I cover quite a lot of those in detail in my dbt Masterclass, but for the sake of installing Git right now, let's focus on downloading Git, installing Git on our local machine, and then in the upcoming videos, as I see fit, I'll continue to kind of explain a bit more detail about specific Git strategies and why we need to use branches, etc. So without deviating too much away from our original goal, let's go back to our terminal. Let me clear the terminal. So it's super clean because we're now kind of moving on to completely different subject. Again, we're gonna use our friend Brew to install Git. And I'm not kind of pulling these code magically really. I'm kind of using the documentations, etc., to kind of get the codes and commands to run these things. So because I've kind of spent additional time going through all of these, so it's much more easier for you. You don't have to go through all of those. But as I've been kind of repeating throughout this video, it's still important for you to go through documentation, even if it's briefly, really understand how things works. Now, let's install Git using Brew. Once you've done that, it will download as usual. Let's give it some time and see what we get. Nice, beautiful. Lots of things have been installed, and don't worry about this error because again, I have multiple user accounts, hence it's kind of giving me error. But we can always verify by typing git -- version. This is a copy paste error. Let me do this. There you go. So we can see the Git version is 2.46. So that's great. We are getting very, very close to our creation of GitHub repository. So we are getting very close to creation of our dbt now. So nice. We have installed Git. Next, what we need to do is to look at how we now set up our dbt. Finally, right? We just had to go through so much stuff to get where we are now. But yeah, let's have a look now on how we can install dbt. Okay, so to install dbt, the best place for us to understand that is to go back to the documentation. So this is a documentation where we have been referencing how to, go through step by step on Python, pip, etc. And at the bottom here, or in the slightly in the middle section here, we have how to set a Python virtual environment. The thing is, we're not going to be following all of these step by step because there are some additional prerequisites that we have to do. By now, I'm sure you must have sort of realized because we had to go through so many things. Most of those things are here, but it's not kind of structured in that way for you to be able to follow everything step by step. Because the way I'm approaching this is by the end of it, you would have the dbt up and running, right? Connected to your Google Cloud project, etc. But this is structured not in that particular fashion. And I really like the dbt documentation. They are really thorough and has like lots of amazing information, but I have kind of structured my approach slightly differently. So bear with me, we'll get to the same end goal. What I want to do is continue to scroll here to this section. So what this shows you here is the installing the adapter, right? So installation of adapter and how you would install dbt-core. So without understanding this first, it will be quite difficult to understand why it is telling us to do this. So it basically asks you to create a virtual environment using Python 3. You activate it and then come here and install this dbt-core. Now, if you're completely new to, I guess, dbt-core, Python, and terms like virtual environment, you might be a bit like nervous and worried, like, oh my God, what is virtual environment? Why do I need this? So I want to take a very quick, I want to take a bit of a back set. So you can see here, we'll need to create a virtual environment, and we've talked about the virtual environment previously, why we need virtual environment, and it's important for us to kind of create an isolated versions. So before we can actually do all of this and install the Python sort of adapter, etc., what we need to do is go back to the terminal. We need to actually decide where we are going to be creating our project, right? The dbt project. So currently we are in the download. I don't want to be in the download. I usually like to kind of keep everything under documents and then projects. And then within the projects, what I will do is I will create a new folder named dbt Bootcamp and press enter. And then we'll go to dbt Bootcamp, and that's it. We're now in the dbt Bootcamp, and I'll clear my screen. So I've decided that I want my folder to be called dbt Bootcamp. Within this folder, I'm going to set up everything that is required for our dbt project, right? So now we can go back here, then follow through these steps. So first of all, what we need to do is create this Python virtual environment, and that would be inside our dbt Bootcamp. So if I type this in, and if we give it a few seconds, nice, you will see we now have the environment, virtual environment here, right? So that's great. Next, what we need to do is to activate the virtual environment, because we've just we've created the virtual environment, but we haven't activated it. Once we've activated this, you'll see the environment here, right? It wasn't here before, but once we activated it, it is basically the terminal is telling us that we can now kind of communicate and use the virtual environment that we just created. Currently, within the virtual environment, we have nothing, right? It just has the basic Python stuff, but we don't have anything that is to do with the dbt specific stuff. So if you read this part of the section, it talks about the installation of the adapters. This code here, this command here means it is going to be installing dbt-core, and it will also install dbt-adapter name. Now this adapter name basically belongs to one of these adapters, right? And we are not going to be using all of these things, right? Postgres, Redshift, Snowflake, BigQuery, Trino, etc. It's really unnecessary to install all of these. We should be selective with what we are installing, so it's much more easier to manage and make sure we have a cleaner environment, etc. And we know we are going to be using BigQuery, because hence we went through all the pain and struggles to set up all these things from before. So we will use the dbt BigQuery instead of installing the dbt adapter for every single thing. So let's copy paste that command here. Instead of adapter name, I'm going to type in BigQuery and press enter. And now you can see it's installing all of these dependencies that dbt core needs, the dbt BigQuery adapter needs inside our environment. It's not installing within the dbt Bootcamp folder, but it's actually installing within the environment. So everything is being created in isolated fashion. It is really important. I know I'm repeating this quite a lot because I really wanted you to understand why virtual environments are so important, right? So once this is completed, we'll see some success message, hopefully. Beautiful, right? So now it's saying it's all good to go. We can double check by confirming dbt --version. It will take some time, but we should see dbt installed successfully. Okay, great. Now, it took some time, but here we are. We have the confirmation of which version is installed. We know we installed BigQuery, so this is all very, very, very good. So now, everybody, we have successfully set up dbt, right? So we started with nothing on our foundation, and we went through the whole step of installing Brew, installing Python, setting up the pip installation. We created Git, we created Google Cloud SDK, connected, authenticated, etc., etc., and to kind of lay the foundation to create the dbt and setting up dbt within our machine. So now this is really good. Now we can actually move on to the next part, which is super fun, and is actually to create a dbt project. So next here, let me see if it actually says here dbt init. Okay, so it's not here, but I know by understanding the documentation is the command that we need is dbt init, which is what triggers dbt-core to go and create a project folder for us where we can continue to build more things behind the scene, where we can continue to build our kind of project specific dbt models. There are a few things that's important for us to be aware of, and it's to do with profiles.yaml. And it's super important because profiles.yaml only exists for dbt-core. If you're a dbt cloud user, obviously you wouldn't have to go through all this setup, and you would also not find profiles.yaml, because in dbt cloud there is a concept called environments and jobs, which is where you would go and configure some of those, your dataset schemas, etc., which is a topic for a different video, different day. But for now, for our purpose, this file is super important because we will be using the profiles.yaml is basically used by dbt-core to communicate with various services like your Google Cloud project, configuring and setting your schema details, your specific developer profiles, etc. Right? So when we create a dbt project using dbt init for the very first time, when I say very first time, you've never created dbt project in your machine, not just like creating a new project. If you've never created that, dbt init command will create the profiles.yaml for you, right? And it will create it in a location like this, which is by default your dbt model uses, right? To read the information from profiles.yaml. You can override the location of these files, but that's like an advanced conversation that we can have in a different video. But this is a default location that dbt will use to read the profiles.yaml configuration information to get the project functional. It also creates something called dbt project.yaml, which we'll look at it later, just in a moment. So why am I emphasizing profiles.yaml here? Because if you're creating for the very first time, it will create it for you. But if you're creating multiple projects, one after another, it will override that configuration for you, right? Then there is another one, which is if you have actually, let's say, went to my dbt Bootcamp GitHub repository, which is public, and you download everything in your local machine, and then you go and do dbt run, which runs the job for you, your model is most likely going to fail because you don't have the profiles.yaml at all because you never created this. So what you will need to do is to manually go to this location, even create the folder and the profiles.yaml file manually, and copy paste the content in there and configure it by yourself. So be very much aware of this fact that there are a couple of scenarios where you could encounter errors if you're, depending on how you're creating dbt projects, right? So it's very important. With that awareness, we can now move on to actually creating and running our model. So let's copy paste this dbt init, but this time we're going to be doing this slightly differently. So let's go back to terminal And if you have installed the VS Code properly, you should be able to type in command like this code in your terminal. And it's actually really, really nice because we can do something like this. Let me just clear this. And you can see, if you remember, within our projects, we have created dbt Bootcamp folder. So what I want to do is type in code dbt Bootcamp, press enter. And what it will do is it will open up the terminal directly with that folder, right, as our parent folder. And I'm emphasizing this because we want to be inside dbt Bootcamp, right? Not outside or any other level. We want to be inside dbt Bootcamp folder level. So let's start by opening up a new terminal, and it's complaining about some insecure files, etc. I'm just going to select no for now, and I'll just do clear. And that's because I'm using the ZSH. If you don't have that, that's fine. You don't need to worry about it. So we'll just start from here. The most important thing that we need to do here is to activate our virtual environment. So make sure you're in the right folder, right? dbt Bootcamp, where you have your virtual environment. And all we have to do is type in the source env bin activate. And that's it. We have the virtual environment activated. The next thing is to type in the command dbt init. And here, what we are doing is we're initializing a dbt repository. It will now ask for us to create the name for our project, and we'll just say transformation. And this is the folder where we'll be building our dbt model. And then now it's asking which database we would like to use. We want to use the BigQuery database. So let's press enter, 1. Next is asking OAuth service account. What are the methods that we want to authenticate using? We would be wanting to use the OAuth method to authenticate. So let's press 1. And then it's asking for GCP project ID. So let's go back. And if you remember, we had this page open where we can see the project ID. So we just copy paste this in our terminal. And it's asking for the name of the dbt dataset. So now it's asking for the dbt dataset. And I think the most fun dataset to work with would be to use the public dataset that BigQuery give us access to. And I'm specifically thinking Stack Overflow. So let's go to the add and search for public here. Then click on public dataset. Then click on here and search Stack Overflow. Nice. And then click on view dataset. And this will give us the detail about the dataset, which is here. So we copy that and paste it in our configuration here. They're asking for thread, and this is basically how many kind of parallel work we want to do. We'll just select 4. Job execution is fine to keep it as it is. And then it's asking the dataset location. It's a choice between US and EU, which is fine because we can just go back to our Stack Overflow, look at the primary data that is residing is in the US. So we want to make sure it's in the same place. And then that's it. So what we have done so far is we've kind of initialized our dbt repository, which we created under transformation. We have all the files and folders, a README, etc. information about the dbt itself. And it has also created the most important file here, right? The dbt project. And the other one is the dbt profiles.yaml. And let's copy this, go back to our terminal and type in this command, which will then open up here. If you're opening this up for the very first time, the VS Code might ask you for some check that you trust the file or not. Just say, yeah, you trust the file. So that should all be good to go. It opened up. So we have created the dbt project, and we have initialized the repository, we've set up everything. But before we can double check everything is working, I want to just take a really quick pause here and explain you why we chose OAuth service account, why we chose OAuth and not the service account. So typically in a scenario like this, we have a couple of options. We have the OAuth, which is the most simple way of authentication and getting it up and running. Then you have the service account where you have to actually go to your project. And let's say you type in here service, I've got it here already. I'll just open it up, service account, and come here and actually create this service account, right? So you go through this whole process of creating service account, granting option, granting users the authentication capabilities, and then you come and select here. When you do that, it's not just creating and giving permission, you would also need to download the JSON file to get the authentication working. Now you can see suddenly that some organizations, they might not like this approach because now they're having to give the JSON file to every single individual. It exposes much more higher risk of security, right? Because that can get exposed and random people could get access to their data warehouse, etc. But there are a lot of security kind of principles and things that you can apply. So I'm not saying you shouldn't, but most of the time is between OAuth and this other thing called service account impersonation, which is what's most popular for like a local development work. So service account impersonation, the processes are very similar to service account creation, but what is different is you don't get the JSON. You still authenticate as it is, but behind the scene, there is a permissioning and service account impersonation permission that has been applied to the user. So you basically can authenticate as normal, but behind the scene, your security is very tightly controlled. And you can configure that in here, right? So method option, you can configure this to be OAuth or service account impersonation. And this is basically all in the dbt documentation. So if you want to understand more about this, you can read about this. And I explained this in much more detail in my dbt masterclass. And I will maybe explain some of these as we see fit in some upcoming videos. But for now, don't worry too much about it. This is more of a background information for you. And I think it's important because I don't want my learners and students, etc., to just know dbt and go build dbt models and be done with it. Sure, we can do that. That's good. But I think knowing everything around dbt, the wider ecosystem and security is super important, right? Because at the end of the day, we are working with your company, enterprise, corporate, whatever that is, data, which is super critical, and having really strong knowledge around security and everything is super important, right? So the goal here is to, yes, become dbt expert, but also to know everything around that. That will make you like a really strong person with a well-rounded skill set. So yeah, sure. That's very good. Hopefully that helps you kind of, widen your kind of understanding of this whole space. Let's go and look into the dbt projects that we've just set up. Let me just clear my screen and I'm going to run a command called dbt debug. And let's wait for a few seconds and see what results we get here. And straight away, you can see here there is an error, not found. And that is an issue. And I have actually intentionally did it because I think it's important for me to explain why this is, because I've seen most of the people struggle to figure out why this is a problem. And the most important thing here is looking at where you are in the terminal. This is always number one thing that you should do, because if you're just using the terminal for the very first time, it can be a bit overwhelming, confusing, what's happening. So you have to always make sure that you're in the right place whenever you're running specific commands. You never want to run a command without knowing what is going to happen. You always want to double check it, right? So what has happened here is you've run the dbt debug command, and dbt, of course, because you're in a virtual environment, it went through everything and it basically couldn't find this file anywhere. So it failed. The the debug configuration has failed, that means you can't run the dbt job successfully. However, if we basically go to the right transformation folder, we can see the dbt project.yaml, which is what is complaining, sits under the transformation folder, right? Not under dbt Bootcamp folder. So if we change the directory to transformation, then run dbt debug, this would work. There you go. Awesome. This is what we want to see, and this is beautiful. All checks passed. This is great because now, from the time we've actually created everything, all the foundation, to where we are now, we've successfully set up dbt, created dbt project, and not just that, we've authenticated, right? This is amazing. So what is happening here now is we are now getting ourselves ready to actually do the dbt modeling, which is what we'll be doing in the next video. So yeah, it's super exciting stuff because in the next upcoming video, we are going to be actually now ready to go and build some dbt models. We start with some basic models. I'll help you understand some of the configurations, and yeah, it's going to be super fun, right? And I'm also thinking to kind of use some of the generative AI capabilities to kind of see how we can use the generative AI to help us assist with the dbt data modeling. So there's a lot of kind of fun things that's upcoming in the upcoming videos. But yeah, I really thank you for being kind of patient and kind of make it all the way through this video, because I know it's quite overwhelming. There's a lot of like foundation setup, basics, concepts, and ideas that is overwhelming. But be with me on this journey, because I do think this is going to be really helpful for you, especially if you're just kind of starting your dbt career, and you will kind of have a much more wider understanding of how to set up dbt and why certain things works and operate in that fashion. So my suggestion for you before we get to the next video is to please spend time going and reading dbt documentation, go and read Google Cloud SDK, everything that you've seen throughout here, even simple things like go and understand Brew a bit more better, go and understand Git source control. Why did I set, you have to install Git in a local machine versus the GitHub, which is the remote kind of managed Git version control system, etc. Just get those basic foundation ideas, concept, theories, build up that knowledge. So that will really help you become better at what you do. So thank you, and I will see you in the next one.